Thank you very much for joining us again on our virtual staff room. I'm delighted to say we've got Jonny Regan on with us today, who is going to present his big things. He's changed the title, which is very sneaky of him. I mean, this is the last in the series of our 10 things, and it seems completely apposite that it is Jonny that finishes it, because it was Jonny who was the inspiration for this theme in the first place. So thanks very much to everyone for coming along. Thanks to Jonny, and over to you.
Thanks, Paul. I have sat through quite a few of these and enjoyed them thoroughly, and been in absolute awe of the kind of talent and insight, inspiration and motivation that you guys and your team, your affiliates and associates have brought. And it's a bit daunting to be the one who's last, because it's all been said so much better than I could have said it in the first place. So with that caveat, I'm going to try something slightly different, and that's slightly different for myself, and I think slightly different for you guys. So yeah, like no pressure. Thanks, Paul. It's going to be a bit interactive. We might have to dive deep inward and do some reflection and think about how we got here, what we've been doing while we are here, and what we might do to move forwards. So that said, here's my introduction. This would have all been a lot easier if Paul had asked me to do that 200 years ago, back when Ian was born. Because he would have said, what are the big things for education moving forward, Jonny? And it would have been dead easy, because you'd have said, well, there's three of them: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then, you know, me being me and Paul being Paul, we would have had a joke. We would have said, well, let's call them the 3 R's. That doesn't make any sense. Job done. And this presentation would be in a whole lot shorter. Unfortunately, times are a little bit more complicated than that now, and we've got so much more to talk about. Just occurred to me, actually, I mean, this isn't in the presentation, but if it was the 70s and it was ABBA, we could have done the 3 M's, money, money, money. That's probably quite topical. But anyway, that's not part of the presentation. I'll move on. So our basics that have formed this sort of core of essentialism, which is the basic dogma of modern education, used to define us, or users of education, as a passive sort of part of a larger machine. It was all about efficiency. And it's all the kind of stuff that Sir Ken, late Sir Ken, nod to him, had such a beef with. Because it's an idea that's brilliant for moving from an agricultural sort of social environment or economy to an industrialized model. It's terrific for that, and it served us really, really well. But it's absolutely useless for navigating the unknowns of a digital revolution. So really, what if the 3 R's are no longer relevant, or as relevant as they used to be? What is enough to help us navigate through, you know, the next 10, 30, 50 years? There's been a lot of talk about this. I know Paul's going to wince when he used the word soft skills. I know other people will wince if 21st century skills are mooted about. But basically, yeah, the 3 R's have now become wrapped in layers and layers and layers, onion-like, of all sorts of other attributes and skills that we need to survive. And I've been involved in all sorts of projects about trying to discover what they are. I recently went through 1,000 respondents to this very question. What are the big things for the future of education? Broadly speaking, people have got roughly the same idea, but nobody seems to be able to sort of put them into action or use them to have any impact on their current situation. So that got me thinking. Today, I want to put this conversation for eternity to bed, because I believe that these real essential skills are kind of things that we probably own given our context. Yeah, they're very personal. So today I want to know what skills you have used to get you through the pandemic. And I'm calling these pandemic power skills. Copyright. So my first question to you, you can do this on a bit of paper, you can note it down on your Chromie books, or you can type it in the chat. What skill did you invoke during this pandemic? Jamie's in there with empathy and emotional intelligence. Thanks, Jamie, for kicking that off. Ian's in there with communications. Okay. Marcus, adaptation, good one. And Ian, helping. Great one, Ian. So here's a bit of an ask. Would one of you be willing to turn your mics on and say, what led you to need that skill? Led you to need that skill during the pandemic?
I'll happily chip in on. Sorry, Ian. I'll happily chip in first and hand over to colleagues who will chip in as well. Just on the self-discipline point, I sort of modified my behaviours just from a fitness and well-being point of view, because during the pandemic, all of our behaviours fundamentally changed, of course, and it was very easy to have back-to-back video calls going on, just back-to-back, literally for maybe 10, 12 video calls. And I very quickly realized that if I was going to last a year doing that, I needed to have a routine that I hadn't got before, which was to really structure exercise in a different way into my day, get up, move around, and sort of live slightly differently. It was my boy that really challenged me about that, actually. He's 14 years old, and he said, Dad, there's going to be two kinds of people who come out of this pandemic. And I said, what do you mean, Alex? And he said, fit or fat. And I was like, yeah, that's a good perspective from a 14-year-old there. And he wasn't far wrong, actually. So I decided to have a very structured, but it does require a different type of self-discipline. And even in our world, where we should be very used to this, because, of course, we've been a cloud business from day one, so we should be very used to it. But even in our world, I would say that it required a lot of adaptation, to use that word that Marcus put forward, which I think is absolutely right. So that would be mine.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for getting the ball rolling as well. Ian, would you like to add?
Yeah, and I put in helping and communications, and I think that what the pandemic sort of brought home to all of us was how often we might communicate with our neighbours, with our family, with our friends, and with our customers, and just realizing the importance of perhaps sort of doing more to communicate, even if it was over the fence or whatever else, and then similarly helping. So we assume that everybody sort of is okay, but actually when you ask them if they need some help, and again, whether that's neighbors, friends, family, customers, then you realize that actually they value those requests. And so yeah, just realizing the power of communication, and that we can all do better, and realizing the extent to which we offer to help people, not at whatever level. So those were the two things.
Thanks, Ian. Awesome. Paul, you've got your hand up.
I have indeed, yes. I'm a good boy, I am. So the two I put empathy and listening, and they're a kind of subset of what Jamie said about emotional intelligence. When you're face to face in a room, as an experienced educator, you read the room, you make judgments, and I've had two days of face to face this week, and during the pandemic, I would do that check-in more regular, but be much more overt about it, be explicit about it. Stop and say, is everyone okay? Do you got any questions? I'm going to leave it a minute. And I found there are longer spaces just to give someone a chance to type. And what I noticed these last 2 days was that I'm doing that explicit checking in real time as well, because it has a real impact. And of course, I was checking in because you check in and assume because you want the flow of the lesson to run. And I think it's just something that really made me realize that stopping and checking and giving them a moment of silence to think really feeds into that whole thing about emotional well-being, empathy, their well-being as well as mine, because it gives you a moment to stop. And I think that's now it's a pandemic power skill that's in my armory now to stay. Post-pandemic, I will be doing that stop and think and reflect moments much more regularly in the training that I deliver.
Awesome. Post-pandemic power skills, copyright, other skills on the market are available.
Marcus, you got Marcus, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, coming back to what you said, Jamie, about the quote that was said about being fat or thin, I personally went through a bit of a self-realization process and went through those both stages, but first being pushed into a box and going along with the flow, then realizing that maybe something should be done and jumping out, not being the frog boarding in the water, and getting fit again after a. So just put that in.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. I saw Neil put something in the chat there. I haven't got it open in front of me.
Patience is what. Patience, especially those having to make big changes. Yeah, some people have made some huge changes, haven't they? Absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant. I mean, what a staggering start. I have a follow-up question to this. How will this post-pandemic power skill that you've invoked, how might it serve you moving forward? You can either sketch that down or put your hand up and want to share that with the rest of us.
Jonny, one of the things that I can't remember, Jamie, you would know, the no-go backery type of thing. I think once you've realized that actually it's a long time since you spoke to somebody, or that perhaps in communities that we're all part of, that offering to thanks for that we're offering to help. Perhaps when we're all so busy, sometimes the opportunity to reflect and then just say, okay, am I doing enough personally to sort of help the rest of my community, whatever that community is? And of course, if I don't talk to them, then it's pretty difficult to understand where they need help. So I guess to avoid just going back into the I'm too busy sort of to spend time to help people and talk to people, I think is what I would take forward.
Yeah, fabulous, Ian. Thanks. Right. We're still on slide 1 because you're so much more engaged than I anticipated. So I'm going to move forward. Thank you. A post-pandemic superpower, copyright. We could all use a little bit more of something. So if there was a skill that you felt may have been lacking during the pandemic, what would your missing skill be? Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, sorry, I've got to. Sorry, I was straight in there with that one, and it's partly because one of the sort of unintended consequences, if I could put it that way, of what I've seen happen in the completely online pandemic world we've all been living through, is that there's been an emergence of perhaps not some of the characteristics we've just been referring to. Perhaps not enough compassion, not enough empathy, not enough patience. So if we could use a little more of something in our world, I would say compassion is probably top of my list. And it gets called various things. Emotional intelligence, all these other things are tied up around this. But compassion, because I see an awful lot of people who become very entrenched in their thinking, which sometimes the online world can amplify. So you get very binary thinking of, my opinions are equal to your facts. That kind of situation. And of course, that isn't true. And we need a little bit more agreeing to disagree, and doing so in a constructive and compassionate way. And I think that we could all use a little more compassion in our world. And if we can get there, then I think we'll all understand each other a lot more, and the world will be a much more happier and productive place.
Absolutely. And that open-mindedness, it's another antidote to the dangers of groupthink. Couldn't agree more, Jonny.
Can I just chip in with something, Jonny?
Please, Chris.
A memory I would go for here. When all the the COVID is kicking off, aren't teachers brilliant? Aren't the NHS staff fantastic? Let's all go out and clap on a Thursday night or whatever. Are we going to go back to now as things begin to go back to normal, whatever that is? Are we going to forget about the people who got us through this very difficult time? I think that's a common thing with human beings. I think IKEA's logo is the wonderful every day. And if you have a normal day where nothing untoward happens, and I think that is the case, but we do have short-term memories of things. And I hope that isn't the case. I hope that the extra, sort of emphasis and praise that was put on teachers and the NHS and that remains and moves forward.
Right. So you'd identify then, praise and acknowledgement as a skill that's maybe been missing, or at least we're in danger of not bringing it forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think you kind of, if your day just runs normally and you don't always engage, you don't always think about the people that are making your life a little bit easier. And it takes something like COVID to actually realize that, there's so many people that are making an impact, not only in your life, but in your family and friends' lives as well.
Right.
Even if, like Ian was saying, re-engage with your neighbours, just see if everybody's okay, connect with old friends. I think it's very important that we do that, because everybody does get extremely busy and caught up in everyday life and work. And sometimes you just need to take a step back and refocus.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, the point you made is really valid. And it's how we actually sort of recognise all those people, because we just talked, didn't we, about sort of the doctors and nurses and teachers, and then of course you would add the care home sort of people, but then you'd also add the police and the fire brigade and all those sort of community workers who work in charities, and then all the people who work in the local authorities that deal with mental health. And by the time you get to it, you realize actually we as a society depend on so many different people at different times. And I just wonder whether there is a way of just sort of celebrating in society a day a year when all those people who help us in our lives get sort of collectively recognized, because whether it's the volunteer that runs the Boy Scouts or the nurse that's just give me a sort of COVID infection, well, they're both important, but in different ways.
Yeah, if I could just chip in there for a second, and Jonny, this is being so engaging that we're going to have to be conscious of time, aren't we? Because I don't know how many slides you've got, but I apologise if we're delaying you here. But one of the things that you really made me think about there, Chris, with your point, is when I look back on the pandemic, one of the things that strikes me as really interesting is how it took quite literally a life and death situation globally to make millions of people change their behaviours. In many ways, for the better. So we've been more efficient. We've been certainly a damn sight more sustainable for the planet we're on, and we can't get off it. So we'd better look after it, because the planet can exist just fine without humans, but it doesn't work the other way around. Mm-hmm. So if we forget some of these lessons, there's a wonderful chart from NASA you'll find on Google. If you Google carbon emissions, NASA photo in, I think it was February to March of 2020, they've done a comparison of the year before and what happened in 4 weeks. And pretty much, if we carried on like that, we would pretty much solve so many of our global climate crisis problems. So we can do it. But isn't it interesting how difficult as humans we find change? Because quite literally, for some people, they have to be faced with the imminent threat of death before they can change. Now, I think that's interesting for all of us on this call, because in the world of education, about creating a smarter and more sustainable world in the future, with all these bright people going through education, my hope for the future is that we learn some of the smart things we've seen in the last year from the pandemic, and we mustn't do the go backery thing. And so Lou Mycroft is 100% right with that, and I think it was a good point.
Yeah, brilliant. As you said about time, we do have another eight little topics to get through. But like you say, it is all fascinating stuff. It'd be nice to put this to bed. The follow-up question to this one, and I'd invite you not to turn your mics back on whilst you contemplate it, maybe just jot down a couple of words, is for your personal skill that you were missing or lacked during this pandemic, what's getting in the way, or what got in the way of you accessing that? Just to be specific, Jamie, sorry, because your example sticks with me, what stopped you being open-minded?
In my particular case,
yeah, but this is a mics off thing, so if you can just perhaps contemplate that while I spool up slide 3, blasting through the hour. So if there was something that was an obstacle to us accessing the skill that was missing, you know, perhaps we could call that our kryptonite, since we've got a bit of a superheroes theme going. For me, I think the biggest thing I experienced this whole pandemic was fear. And none of it was to do with being ill. None of it was to do with COVID. Everything was to do with the unprecedented amount of changes and challenges that I faced personally. And fear can be a sort of a crippling thing. And that leads to a sort of a sensation of vulnerability. You know, even doing something like this, you know, one feels a little vulnerable. But perhaps you could write down under your last sentence a fear that was keeping you from accessing that last skill, or a fear that you have about your own skills. A little bit later on, towards the end of the presentation, we'll have a chance to reflect on the whole list of things you've compiled. While you're thinking about that, there is a mics on question coming up. So why do you think fear is useful actually to us? Anybody?
Yeah, I'll happily chip in there. I did a little bit of work on this, actually, funnily enough. This is a whole subject we could talk about for half an hour in itself. I was in a leadership group once doing an analysis of what determines commercially successful people. And I felt like I was an imposter, because I'd come from a background where I didn't necessarily think I was fitting in, because everyone around me seemed to be tremendously well-groomed, very experienced executives who'd been to prestigious universities and all these different things. And I was sitting there, you know, somewhat concerned. Anyway, the outcome of the research and the discussion that we were having is that in actual fact, if you'd come from a slightly troubled background, if you'd had a hell of a lot of problems in your life, if you'd overcome those challenges, and if you hadn't had a lot of advantages on your initial part of life starting off, it actually turned out to be one of the key drivers of success. And just to address this point specifically, and what I put into the thread there about fear of failure running deep with me, it does. The thing that bothers me more than anything isn't losing money or not getting some deal or whatever. It's letting down any of the people on this call right now. For example, Dave's just joined, and we work with Dave regularly. And if we were doing something on a project together, my primary concern is not to let Dave down. Because if Dave came back to me and said, Jamie, this just hasn't gone right, and I'm really disappointed because you normally do an amazing job, that would bother me more than I can put into words, right? So that fear, that drives me, that I'm haunted by it, and I've never been able to shake it off. Now, somebody told me once, well, don't shake it off, because that actually drives you to do all the stuff you're doing. You might not enjoy it, and it might not be pleasant, and it isn't, but that drives me big time, and it does haunt me. I've never been able to shake that off, and maybe I shouldn't, but definitely fear of failure, or fear of not meeting people's expectations.
That's a massive share, Jamie. Thanks. Anybody else? The question, Dave, was that you just jumped into was how might fear be of a benefit to us? But somebody was about to speak.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'd echo Jamie's comments there. I actually get, like, from a fear point of view, I feel slightly nervous every morning before I start work, and it's not because I'm going to get on a call with Ian for 20 minutes and I won't have a clue what he's asking me. It's too technical. But it's just that making things happen and not letting people down. Absolutely. My previous job, I used to make sure that deliveries, we did print, so it was delivery. I would actually put jobs in the back of my car that had missed the couriers and drive them to people up and down the country over the weekend, just so that I didn't feel that I was letting people down. I've always had that. It's a very strong feeling for me as well. But I think it helps me from an organization, but, it helps me to organize things better and clearer. And I'm always conscious that, that fear is driving me forward. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I'll probably have a heart attack in 3 years' time. But but other than that, it can be a powerful ally, fear, if you use it constructively.
Chris, thanks for sharing that as well. I mean, I'm sitting here going, I thought it was only me. Feels a bit we're getting a bit therapeutic. Thanks, guys. Dave, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just struck me then. I think in that approach from Chris is probably why he works with Jamie and Ian and the team, because his values align with C Learning's there, don't they? So I think that probably would have been spotted when he first joined the company, or even before he joined the company. But I think Chris I thought he was going to say what I was going to say then, that it's nerves, isn't it? It's nerves before a performance, and a performance can be when you stood on stage, it can be when you stood speaking to a conference, it can be when you stood in front of a class, or it could be like Chris has just intimated there, just because he wants to perform well, he's got a strong work ethic, he wants to do a good job, and isn't that such a valuable resource? And our CEO, Mark Morehouse, has a phrase saying 97% of people want to do a good job, so let them do that. And I think that's really key. And the other 3% almost take care of themselves. They won't be around for long. So I think that fear, the use of fear in the right way and embracing the fear is really important. And just apologies for joining late. And the other word that jumps out from your slide, Jonny, is vulnerability. And I think it's really important that we show our vulnerability. And that's something that I think that I've tried to embrace more recently. And I think it's really having beneficial effects. Going to somebody and saying, I'm not the source of all knowledge. I don't know everything. Why don't you find that out and come back and teach me? And then they do it and they come back and I go, that's brilliant. I didn't know. You've taught me something there. And they get so much from that, because they're used to coming to me for training and support and coaching. But when I flip that on my head and show my vulnerability, it teaches me something. It gives them a sense of achievement. And it means it's a job that I don't have to do. Instead of pretending that I know it, running away, looking it up and coming back and going, oh yeah, you do this, this and this. Admitting that vulnerability, it can be positive and it can have a positive feedback loop, I think. Yeah, those are my observations. So sorry if I've completely missed the context.
No, absolutely brilliant. I mean, you had Ian there who typed, fear definitely stops you jumping off the cliff, which nobody can argue with. But also with that, as you're saying, Dave, once you face your fear or your vulnerabilities, it's amazing what doors open up. And with that, I'm going to go to slide 4. We're slightly behind schedule, but we're catching up. action. The world needs your superpowers. So how is one of these new real post-pandemic power skills going to impact something that you are facing today? How are you going to apply what you've just written down? Specific. You can either write that down, or we've got maybe 2 minutes for somebody to share. Paul Farrell.
It's not very formal. I mean, I kind of already said it earlier, but I noticed in my face-to-face sessions this week with one of our colleges in South Wales that my delivery was different, because that checking that, you know, people are managing their fear, if you like, within an online environment that I've been doing for 18 months, and that I'd changed that technique because I felt the need to check in, because as a teacher in a classroom, you read the room and make assumptions. I realized that I'm not going to do that. That was kind of a, whilst it, you know, experienced teacher, mostly, of course you read the room when you get it right. But I'm now thinking, well, maybe I don't always. I'm just assuming I got it right. So now I'm much more explicit. So we stop regular and we reflect. And I mean, I was teaching adults, I wasn't teaching students, but the principle is exactly the same. That my power now is definitely that in that delivery process, because I've done it online and it's worked for the people at the other end, I will continue to say to them, stop, let's think, how are we doing? Where are we at? What's the pace? What's our next step? And it's that, I suppose it's more of a collaboration rather than me driving it mostly and giving them a bit of leeway to contribute. It's a much more kind of dynamic, sharing, equal relationship. Maybe that's where it ends up being.
Yeah, nice realization. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Hopefully you've all got a thought that you've either kept in your head or that you've noted down. As I say, this might be a bit useful at the end of the presentation. Okay, blasting through to halfway. They've already come up, but I think we should explore them a little bit more. Values, I think, have what helped some people thrive through pandemic. I think probably the people who stuck to their values or who have dug deep to recognize and think about their values are doing okay. I also like this idea that, you know, Socrates, know thyself. But today, because of AI, Ian, I thought this one would be interesting to you. We've got serious competition when it comes to knowing thyself, since computers will be able to do a much better job of that in the next 5 years. So, have you got a value that you'd like to, one word, type into the chat? Thanks, Jamie. Yeah. Honesty, imagination, integrity, and enthusiasm.
I like Ian's comment there about imagination, and the reason why, Johnny, is because I love that quote that I saw somewhere. I forget who said it, but they said that computers and artificial intelligence will never truly replace us because they might have memory, but they have no imagination.
That's right,
and I love that.
And I also think, Jamie, that with imagination, there is no problem that this world cannot solve.
Yeah. AI is no match for genuine human incompetence. Yeah. Brilliant.
Isn't there another quote, though, that to err is human, but it takes a computer to really screw things up?
Yeah, fabulous. But I also think it's because, you know, I mean, this gets to the point, doesn't it? Computers don't have values. People do. That's probably going to be a very, very defining factor as we think about not just in education in the future, but everything in the future. So keep your values close. Slide 6, acknowledgement. So everybody in this room right now, I'm going to just use the blanket term educators because we happen to be, close to education. This goes back to, I don't know, slides ago, hours ago, when Chris was talking about, acknowledging the health service and educators and the fire service, as Ian added. I think that every single educator, it's out the bag. They're not just people who teach lessons. People involved in education, they're all leaders, even if they're in the classroom, because they've all got this job to do to facilitate others. They're all designers because they have to think of novel and ingenious ways of imparting not only their knowledge, but their skills and their experiences. And they do it because it's better for everybody else. That's what a designer should be doing. They're all researchers because they've got to understand a whole load of stuff that they didn't get given in a package in an envelope when they signed up to be teachers or any other sort of affiliates of education. And I also think they're architects as well. Anybody who's involved in education is an architect, because they really are dreaming up new structures and they really are creating new frameworks to hang the details of whatever it is, of their particular job within. And architecture is really inspiring. So I think I'd like to acknowledge anybody who's an educator, because there are at least 4 other jobs. Is there anything that I've missed off the list? Okay. In that case, there are a certain number of skills that we have heard an awful lot about. They've been in some brilliant lists by some of your brilliant colleagues. And as I said earlier, I asked this question to 1,000 people, and this one turns up in 900 responses. And I think it's just worth having a little bit of a kick about with this one. You can't do anything without creativity. I think it's something Ken also bashed on about, because creativity it's the default state of our brains. When we're not doing anything, there's just a load of data knocking around in a sort of space in our skulls. And every now and again, 2 bits of data collide, like, I don't know, penguin, bicycle, and your brain goes, oh, that looks interesting. We shall apply some critical thinking to that, maybe just a little bit, and we shall start seeing if anything else attaches to that in a creative fashion that might lead to something. These executive functioning skills areas in the brain start kicking in. And the degree to which you turn that knob of, critical analysis is how pure the creativity is. Think of, say, a musician soloing to a piece of music he's never heard before. The knob's all the way over there, a lot less organization, just absolutely riffing away. But if he wants to write that down, the knob's got to go all the way over the other side, So Ken's right. The one critical, powerful, essential skill that's going to do any of us any good into the future is this creativity. So where are you on the dial of creativity? Are you all the way to the left or all the way to the right? And you can do that with your finger, which might be nice to look at everybody. Where are you on the scale? Are you less organization, less, or more crazy creativity? Paul's all the way up in the air. Ian's an X-Man. Dave's just not decided. He's swinging both ways. I think it's the expression. Okay, awesome. Slide 7, doing well. What's Steve said here? It's gone. Welcome, Steve. We missed what you said.
I just said there's a wonderful TED Talk and a book It's probably I call it the predecessor to The Power of Us, called Collective Creativity. And it's by Harvard Business School Professor Linda Hill. And she talks about this creative or collective creativity, and the whole ethos around that. And I talk about a Pixar approach of it's not one person creating the movie. There's design, there's thoughts, and everybody making this wonderful thing. Not just one person coming up with the ideas, designing it, building it, drawing it, and then getting it to market and getting into the cinemas. It's a majority of people coming together, vast and in different elements of creativity, that takes a whole journey to get that element out there. And yeah, there's a great book on it if you've not read it, and I think the TEDx talks about 17 minutes. Go have a look, it's great.
Awesome, thanks, Steve. Throw any links you've got or any resources into the chat. Pick them up later.
Will do.
There's another one as well of these skills that we can't ignore. Doesn't matter whose list you're looking at. And I think Ian was very much talking about this earlier, the idea of being there for other people, working with other people. And of course, collaboration. It's what has defined our success as humans. I think animals have been around for about 600 million years. And in that 600 million years, 99% of all life forms have died. And we're actually still here and doing quite well, relatively speaking. And Darwin has it that, this situation exists because of our ability to collaborate. Would anybody like to add anything on collaboration? Thanks for the link, Steve. Because I notice it goes very, very well with communication, which is one of the other C's that people talk about. And as with creativity and critical thinking, they seem to be very, very closely related, and to the extent where you can't really have one without the other. And I would say the same thing for collaboration and communication.
Yeah, I'll just chip in. Yeah, it was me. I just to chip in on your question, your point there, Johnny, about I refer back to Ian's point earlier, actually, in the chat, that collaboration, for it to happen, I think you do need that safe space, as Ian called it. I think you need to, and it goes back to the other theme that we talked about earlier about fear, because that's one of the main factors I see in organizations that have a dominant culture of either compliance, which is usually linked to fear of not complying with policy, regulation, or cultural norm, whatever. Yeah. That kills innovation stone dead, and it kills collaboration stone dead. So I think we have to have the right environment in which to nurture collaboration, and you have to be in a safe space to do so. Because if people feel safe to collaborate, then they generally do.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some great rules with collaboration as well that are all based around, your ability to be a great listener and to ask great questions or to negotiate or model, and connect that to the power of the group. Yeah, it's definitely a skill, no doubt about it. We can't not have it on our list today. Any more thoughts on that before we move to slide 9? Because I realize we've caught up so well.
I was just going to drop in the lack of, especially in the UK, the lack of emphasis put on this whole agenda of skills versus knowledge, and also how we remove this facet of real life in endpoint assessments currently, that you sit on your own for a long period of time. You're not even allowed to take a textbook in. When was the last time that you couldn't solve a problem, so you read a book, tried to retain all of that information, and then sat there for hours thinking, I don't know that, but I'm not going to ask anybody. I'm just going to sit here and hope it pops to my head. Retrieval practice is important, but I think it's just that collaborative approach needs more emphasis, because the world doesn't exist without it, in my opinion. And I just think it's a skill that children and young people and adults have to learn after, in a real world context, and it's startling to them because the amount of industry that is saying they're great at this and they can design a website and they can do all of this stuff, but they can't speak to the customer and they can't work with others and are wonderful individuals. They're not getting very far, and I think it's a blocker to the UK, England, particularly in terms of our how we can be key players in the world market and tech market, because we can do things, but we can't do things together or to a design.
Yeah, it's amazing how not acknowledging these things can really stifle our progress. You know, if you acknowledge creativity, collaboration, vulnerability, which I think one was a brilliant one before, you've got every chance of setting yourself off in the right direction. Brilliant. Thanks, Steve. Slide 9 of what we assume is going to be 10. Well-being. So, I think I've got this slide twice. Look, there's a prettier version of it. Well-being. So I grabbed these from the WHO, from the World Health Organization, and then I added my own at the bottom there. Just have a quick look at them and see which one resonates with you. Anything standing out there for you? Ian, you're smiling. What's that about?
Of course, I hardly ever spend any time in front of a computer or a mobile phone. Sorry, I'm just reading the. And yes. So, well-being. I don't know. All of these things are obviously true, but it's all in proportion to the individual. Was it famously Margaret Thatcher who survived on 4 hours sleep a night, whereas the vast majority of us need a few hours sort of more. So I think, I can see all of those things being absolutely important. And saying thank you is definitely one that gets missed off that list. So great list, Jonny.
Thanks.
Yeah, and routine. I mean, that is a really interesting one. Some years ago, somebody shared with me some research which I realized was true from my own experience years later, which is that what happens to you when you first wake up, for example, in the morning, really sets your kind of approach to the day in terms of your emotional well-being. The classic example is what music you hear first thing in the morning. So what you definitely don't want to listen to is your alarm clock, is like Simply Red's Holding Back the Years. You know, it will profoundly affect you for the rest of your day. But if you listen to something like Jump by Van Halen or something like that, then or your equivalent to it, it can give you a completely positive mental mindset for the rest of the day. A bit like the gratitude thing as well. If you start your day by thinking about 3 things you're grateful for, Chris to play it. Then
I want him to sing it.
Yeah. This is going to descend into chaos now, Jonny. I'll stop there, but I think it was a really interesting point.
Brilliant.
Can I just mention about routine as well, John, from a mental health point of view as well? Before I joined C Learning, I was put on the furlough scheme, and I knew I was going to be on that scheme for probably about, it was at least 3 months. And I thought, I need to have a plan here. I need to have a routine. So in order to keep my mental well-being going, I set up a list of things to do every day, even if it was just tidy the kitchen or whatever. But make sure I stay active, make sure that I'm ready, once the call comes to go back to work, or as it turns out, join C Learning. For me, routine is very important. Otherwise, it can affect me negatively if I don't know what my plans are or where I'm heading.
Yeah, brilliant, Ed. Thanks. I'd like to add, my comments about gratitude. It seems like a really perfect time to say thank you to you all for being really authentic for the past months, and before that, when I knew you, from previous gigs, as it were. Paul has provided this safe space that you've already spoken about. Thank you for that. Ian, can't thank enough for his mantra of how can I help you? I just love it. I'm going to hijack it and use it as my own. Jamie, I'd like to thank you for your generosity and your insight. I remember when you first invited me to get in touch with you, just for a chat. It's a very, very wonderful thing you did. And the team as well, Steve and the EduFuturist, and Dave and Pies and Marcus and all the gang, you know, for your endless contribution, your endless inspiration and your wisdom. And of course, your humor. I've really got to thank everybody for being human, because after all, that's the thing that's going to be the defining feature of our success in the future, not just technology, of which I'm a big fan. Coming up to slide 10, guys. Shall I move on? Thought so. I love this one. I really did want something to put up that at least made me look like I knew something about something. It's like the SMART slide. It's the conditions for change formula. And I think, you know, if you've not seen it before, it basically says, you know, change isn't going to happen unless everything's in place. And I think we can all agree that everything is in place. You know, COVID-19, with these skills that we've identified that can propel us forward, plus the fact that we've all been experimenting with, you know, hybrid digital learning technologies, all of this is greater than the reason for sticking with traditional thoughts and traditional education. So that's it, slide number 9.5, because you can never get to 10. No such thing. There's only the possibility of inching forward. But there's always a little bit more, isn't there? Oh, I thought I'd ask my kids what they thought. We've got 4 minutes left. I thought it was really, really great what they came up with. What's their big things for the future of education? And a couple of things stood out for me in there. Mental health days. They're 13 and 15, right? Mental health days. Teaching about sexuality and gender stress. Wasn't on my list. Caring for the planet. I mean, it's brilliant, isn't it? It's really hopeful. I thought I'd like you to see that, because these guys are going to be in our position. You know, they're going to be on a Zoom call in 20 years, talking with a group of like-minded people. I hope they remember this. That's it. There can't possibly be any more slides. Oh no, still more. This is my finishing up slide. You know, I heard this expression, you probably have done a lot, you know, can't wait to get back to normal. Well, it's not coming. You know, I saw a video of an AI robot the other day painting portraits. I also signed up for an AI called Pseudo Write that was writing novels. Things aren't going back to normal. And whilst that might, you know, and here's the thing, here's what the whole point of this presentation has been about. Whilst that might be scary, you know, for a lot of people, this unknown, this ridiculous amount of change, that's going to bring up the same kind of emotions as any other loss would be, you know, and yearning for how it was before, you know. And in mourning, you have emotions like anger and denial. I think bargaining and depression are the next ones you go through. I think it's all very natural. But the antidote to all that, I think we've finally put to bed today. You need a set of post-pandemic superpowers. And hopefully you've got a list written down of the things that drive you and will drive you and everybody else forwards through the next years. There's one for Ian.
Always like a bombshell, Jonny. So thank you very much. And unfortunately, I'm just going to have to run and get some sort of nice biscuits, Johnny. But I've got a call.
Well, guess who? This is the reason I've just brought Ali along, because Ian got your biscuits, Ali.
Yay! Are you still alive, Ian?
I apparently am. Yes. No, they were great.
One of the big changes, Ian, don't go yet. One of the big changes that has helped us all, get through this is being together. And, I thought it would be a good opportunity to tell you that we're getting hitched in November.
Oh.
And on that bombshell, I threw my slide in too early.
Yeah, you did.
That's the first engagement live in the virtual staff room.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Have a great great weekend.
Johnny, I've got to say, sorry, I know Paul's going to chip in now and we're down to 60 seconds, but I mean, that was TED Talk standard. That was just absolutely brilliant. And I can't wait to share the recording of this with all of our wider networks, friends, family and community. And that was just absolutely inspirational stuff. I know it's an often used term, but that was inspirational. Johnny, that was amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't agree more. Johnny, here's what you should have done at the end. Should have got a microphone in your hand and just gone, boom. Absolutely. Just phenomenal. Amazing. As always. I knew you would let us down.
I've learned so much there from everything. All of you shared on this session, all your sharings and insights and stuff. I've made so many mental notes of things that you've made me reflect on. I'm going to be thinking about this for the rest of the day. So thank you.
Absolutely fantastic. I think we need to finish there because it was silly to try and summarize or add anything else. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Thank you very, very much, Johnny. And I will get this posted up this afternoon onto YouTube and then let you all know so you can share it more widely.